I try to pick the pieces in my mind, put them in a pretty little line for you to see. I try.
Hello everyone, I'm Joe Collins and this is Dear DM, a Dungeons & Dragons advice podcast where each episode I sit down with a different Dungeon Master in order to discuss, debate, and hopefully answer your D&D related questions. I'm very excited to get into this episode, but first, as always, I want to thank everyone who submitted their questions for this episode. If you would like to hear your question discussed on a future episode, please remember to send it to us on Twitter at DearDMPodcast or in an email to deardm.submit@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the show, it would mean the world to us if you would share it with your friends or leave a review on iTunes. This week, my guest is an old friend of mine who was largely responsible for my renewed love of D&D back in the day. I'm extremely happy to welcome to the show Ethan Reviere. Thanks for joining me, Ethan.
Thank you, Joe. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, it's about time. We've been friends for a damn long time and playing D&D for just about as long. And I'm actually excited to ask this next question because I realized when I was planning on having you on that I never actually talked to you about it. How did you get into D&D?
Well, I was about 13 years old and I got the 3.5 Player's Handbook. And after that point, I kind of... My stepdad played D&D growing up, and he played Advanced D&D, and so we mixed 3.5 and Advanced D&D, and had some mixed system, and it was very interesting.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
kind of like an even earlier version of everyone mixing up 3 and 3.5 and Pathfinder and the whole amalgamation that was in between 3 and 4.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's awesome because that's one thing is we started playing when we went to college together, primarily in a very, very goofy game in general. That was it was pretty much what got me back into D&D. I hadn't played it since like early high school, and then I jumped back in when we started playing. But yeah,
when I started playing D&D, I stopped playing video games because I realized that D&D could hold all of my imagination and video games couldn't. And so that's why I just really fell in love with it.
Well, yeah, I feel like I almost feel like I need to have that that gif from SpongeBob with the rainbow, just imagination.
Imagination.
It pretty much covers all of D&D.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But yeah, so you've played a little bit of 5e at this point, but you're still primarily familiar with the earlier editions, right?
Definitely. I skipped 4th. But I started playing 5th, and I love it.
Yeah, it's kind of. As theater nerds, it's kind of our speed. 5e in general is very, very prone to, or very good for role playing in general. So I figured you'd love it. But yeah, that is an interesting point, though. I feel like, most people know 4th edition is probably the most skipped, just for almost that exact same reason. Like, it kind of didn't play towards the role playing. It was more combat focused, if I remember correctly. I played like one game of it, but didn't play much beyond that.
Same here. Yeah, I really love the role playing aspect, and so I was just waiting for the next edition to come out, and hopefully it kind of went back to like a 3.5 style or more towards role playing and having a good balance, also making it user friendly for new players.
Yes, I
really like that.
That's the big thing with 5e, is that people can jump in who haven't played before. But that I will say that even though I haven't played very much of it, 4e did, like, there are a lot of mechanics that carried over and that, like, especially homebrew carried over, that are still super valuable. I just needed at some point actually educate myself on the entirety of 4e. to use them better. But so without further ado, you want to jump in and start asking some questions that the lovely folks at home send in?
Let's do it.
All right. So our first one is from Megarev, and it's pretty simple, but I think it's interesting. How do you decide what loot to give to your players?
I I tend to struggle because there are so many ways I could choose what to give to my players after an encounter or just where they go. Well, first off, there are tables that are like in the books that you can roll up, treasure. Also, there are loot generators online, and you can find those that are specific for 5e or anything else.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's extremely useful, especially with some of the resources online that even just a quick Google search can bring up. There are millions of them, but I in particular, for half the stuff I do, use a site called Donjon, or I think that's the pronunciation donjon.bin, I think, or something. I'll put a link or whatever, but it has so many useful tools, and one of them is a random loot generator and a magic item list. And those have gotten me through a lot of, or at the very least, picking out items to give to players.
Well, I also like to think about what would, without having a loot generator, or if you don't have all of the books that have all the treasure tables, ask what does the party need and what is the party looking for. And give them things that are realistic. So, like, if you're going up against a bugbear, does the bugbear have like a bunch of gold and magical items hanging on him? Probably not.
Probably not. Unless it's a very, very aristocratic bugbear.
Yeah, just finding what makes sense with the encounter. And when it comes to magical items, as a DM, I like to create little magical items that don't really have a huge effect in game, but it's like a little trinket that they can use just to add to their character.
Kind of, yeah. And that's kind of the thing, is that like there are two basic categories in which you can put techniques in which you decide how to give loot to your players. And I feel like, one, there is the random aspect. You can roll from tables or just do a loot generator like we talked about online, something to that effect, and just say, well, you find item 100, item 364, and items 3, because that's what we rolled. Or you can purposely pick stuff with the party in mind. And I feel like, for me, it usually boils down to a combination of the two. Especially if it's a story-driven campaign, which is the kind I tend to run. There's usually moments or boss fights or something to that effect in which there is an item or two that's specifically like, oh, the fighter could use this, or oh, this would really help out the sorcerer, or oh, the warlocks wanted this for a long time, kind of thing, that I pick out in mind. But then you also always want to have interesting loot that is not specific, because otherwise it feels like they're playing a video game and they just, found the loot that was supposed to be given to them at the end of the fight, versus actually finding spoils from some sort of dragon horde or something to that effect. I think it's important to have both, so it doesn't feel like you're just handing the players like a reward for having completed X amount of encounters. Now you earn your weapon that you're supposed to have, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Also, I like to think about, what items could I drop for players that seem a little mundane, that don't really have any like special quality, but they look interesting or something like that, but they hold on to that item until they find another item, and then they see that they kind of match, or they kind of go together, and then they create like a new property.
Huh. So kind of even like a, an ongoing, like, it could even become sort of a subplot of, why are there all these odd ivory carvings kind of thing, or like something, like it's part of a set that they end up finding, rather than...
Yes.
I will say that reminds me that, like, one of my things as a DM is that a lot of the times I'm not a huge fan of just handing out gold, and large amounts of money. Like, obviously they're gonna find gold pieces and stuff, but like, I think it's a lot more interesting if instead of saying, okay, you find, 132 gold, 52 silver, and whatever copper, it's more interesting to say, you found a statue, and that's like a mini carved golden statue, and then like these kinds of gems, and like actually describe the loot they're getting, and then tell them like the value of those items. And not only does that make it more interesting than just saying, okay, here's your monetary reward, it also gives them the opportunity for A, roleplay, and B, charisma bargaining rolls for when they bring that stuff into town and try to sell it. Which is always nice for the bard or the sorcerer or the whichever charisma character wants to try and bargain.
I completely agree with that. Also, one more thing came to mind. What about finding letters? Finding letters that are written by people and got lost in translation, or and trying to return this letter to someone or something like that, or just holding on to it and seeing what that can bring to your campaign.
Yeah, and that can add context, that can add lore, that can add a lot. That's a really good idea. You could even make it, I wouldn't say you would want to make it Elder Scrolls like, where every every book is like, oh, this is something about the world and a bunch of lore and background that you can just find, because as a DM, I do not want to write that shit out ahead of time.
You don't.
unless it's pretty important. But God, if I could just professionally be a DM, just have that be my job, I would totally write just all the books in the world that are just little background things. But since that time is finite, I would not want to do that otherwise. But the occasional like written out book or letter or something that gives context or mystery or a plot hook is an excellent option for loot, rather than just being items of value or use kind of thing.
It would be funny if they picked up a book and instantly their sneak skill went up. They're like, oh,
what
I'm sneakier now.
God, that could be like if after reading the book, the How to Lockpick book, you gain like advantage on thieves' tools checks for the next hour.
That would be cool.
Something enough that could be something you could play with, but I don't think it's meant for that. But
definitely not.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a million ways to go about choosing the loot for your players. But in general, I always try to the golden rule is you want to do more than just hand out a gold and a magic sword when you're dealing with loot. You don't want it to be either too perfect or just, the one thing you want to avoid is have it feel like a loot drop from a video game. You don't want it to feel like we killed the dragon, now we get this sword. You should feel like, ooh, we found this item amongst all this, all this debris we had to search through, or amongst the piles of gold, and that makes it 1,000 times more interesting than just, this is our reward for completing that encounter.
Definitely.
All right. So, I think that brings us to the middle of the show, which is where we do our fun little character creation segment,
Character creation!
Which is now our official jingle, for this segment. This is, for those who haven't listened before, this is a section where I have some, tables set up, some random rolling tables for various aspects of, character creation. And we create 3 characters and then choose our favorite based off of the random rolls we get. And all you folks at home who are artistically inclined can create fan art or backstories or whatever inspires you via the character we come up with. We've had some fantastic submissions the last couple of weeks. Travis Mattingly killed it yet again, as he always does. And you can find him at T Mattingly Art. On Twitter, he's been killing it every week. And also we have new submission from Bex at The Good Cup of Joe on Twitter. Both of our submissions for the last episodes were fantastic. It made my week. They are hilarious. We retweeted them at Dear DM Podcast if you want to check those out. Honestly, like, it is my favorite part of the week to check that stuff out. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new character for everyone to check out and make art based off of, or whatever folks are inspired to do. Do you have a D20 ready, Ethan?
I do. It's right in front of me. It's pink and it's shiny.
Ooh. That's a fun tidbit, by the way. Did you know that my primary set of dice is still the set that you gave me, like in that first campaign? Like that's that like light green blue set is still like my primary set I use for all of my important games.
That makes me so happy, Joe.
But yeah, let's start rolling. I got the tables up here. So why don't we first roll for the race of the character?
All right, here I go. Oh, I fell off the table.
Well, then we're done. This segment is dead. We're no longer doing this.
It doesn't count. I rolled a 19.
19 is tabaxi. So we've got a cat person, which is a good option. Next, we're rolling for profession.
7.
7 is monk. Okay, I can see this so far. Let's go for background.
20.
Bounty hunter. Okay.
Oh, ooh.
This is an interesting character. Giant cat person goes around punching people they're paid to punch. And then let's screw the character up with a character quirk.
All right, here's 12.
12 is always obeys even the stupidest laws.
Oh, gosh.
Okay, so this is like a lawful, neutral tabaxi bounty hunter who's just like hunting down everyone, but like never jaywalks, never like is tracking someone down, but curfew kicked in. Oh, I gotta head back in. Oh, Jesus.
It's like he's trying to chase someone and they run inside their house and they lock it, but he needs a warrant to get inside.
He plays by the rules.
And nothing but the rules.
Jesus. It's like the opposite of, what's his name, like Dog the Bounty Hunter or whatever. It's just Cat the Bounty Hunter. All right, so that's a good first option. Let's go ahead and roll up the next one. Starting with race again.
5.
5 is halfling.
All right. Tiny little guy. Big feet, small feet.
I mean, either way works. I don't judge.
Okay. 19.
19 is accountant. Okay. I'm glad we finally rolled that one. Halfling accountant.
4.
That would be entertainer. Okay. So his background is an entertainer, but his profession is accountant. So he used to be like a musician or an actor, but he now has a day job as a financial advisor or something to that effect.
You want to see something really nice? Watch your credit score go up 500 points.
Jesus. The day I run a game in which the characters have fantasy credit scores is the day I quit D&D. That is a horrifying scenario. And then let's make this interesting character even more interesting with a character quirk.
18.
18 is makes fun of opponents by mimicking them. So a former halfling bard turned accountant who still hasn't quite given up vicious mockery.
I can't get over it.
Oh god, that's just not making incredibly snide, like passive aggressive remarks about like people not saving up enough money or making bad investments behind their back.
Yeah, I'd like to open an account.
Oh, I'd like to open an account.
I can't even speak right now. Okay.
So we've got the law-abiding tabaxi bounty hunter and the former bard termed accountant halfling. Let's come up with a third option real quick. See what horrible amalgamation we create.
Okay. 6.
6 is Dragonborn.
Ooh. 2.
Barbarian. All right.
I can see where this is going.
You never know. You never know until the last 2.
8.
8 is Hermit. Okay, that's not too outlandish. This character sounds somewhat feasible until we come up with a character quirk, which is
11.
Personally offended when mail is misdelivered. So it's a barbarian dragonborn who lives in the middle of nowhere as a hermit, but really relies on his mail being delivered, and gets enraged at the mailman every time he fucks up.
I'm seeing this happening weekly.
This is like an elderly dragonborn barbarian who lives alone and is constantly, oh, now I'm sad about it.
What if the villain that he faced while he was younger was a mailman?
I mean, that would give him an interesting backstory at the very least. All right, so we have like 3 pretty good options here. We have the cranky barbarian hermit dragonborn who has a real issue with the post service. We have the cat person bounty hunter who's just punching the shit out of folks.
But following the rules.
But following the rules. He is the most by the books bounty hunter. And then we have the halfling, former entertainer, now accountant, just making fun of all of his clients. Oh, that's a tough decision.
It's a really tough decision.
I'm almost... Okay, so...
do we pick one?
Yeah, we pick one, and then folks make whatever they like based off of that. Obviously, if someone made something based off the other characters, I wouldn't be upset at all. But I like for us to pick a favorite, so it kind of narrows it down. I'm kind of leaning towards the Tabaxi.
I'm too.
I just like that idea of like super anal, like follows the letters to the T. But the second they get the chance to legally punch someone, they're so gung-ho about it.
I love that idea.
All right, so we're going to go, then it is official. We have chosen the Tabaxi monk bounty hunter who will follow even the stupidest of laws. And as usual, if that inspires you in any way, either to make fan art or a backstory or bio or whatever you creative types are interested in making, please send that to us at deardmpodcast on Twitter or at our email deardm.submit@gmail.com, and I will, as always, gleefully go through those, and it will make my week. So we should get back to what our meat and potatoes is here on Dear DM and start answering some more questions. Y'all ready for this? All right. Our next question is from Bo Barely or Bobberly, either one, I'm not sure. But Bobberly asks, any tips for running an urban campaign? My players want to play a Thieves Guild type game set in a large city, but I've only ever done open world exploration games, and I'm not too sure how to go about a game in a primarily urban setting. Yeah, this one. This one is interesting because it's one that I've only dealt with. Well, not super recently, both in the last year or so. I've only ever started dealing with urban settings.
Well, I like to think about. Usually games are moving across like the countryside to different parts of the continent. But when you're trying to hone it in into like a large city, I think of the large city as the country. And so there are multiple layers. There's a hierarchy.
Oh yeah, and that's one thing that I was absolutely thinking is that like essentially when I do an urban setting, I basically treat the city as a not exactly like a country, but similar run, because instead of having different cities that they go to, you just have different districts. that would be my number one recommendation, is when you're designing the city that they're running in, make sure that there are distinct districts. There's a docks district, a merchant district, so there are these distinct areas that they go into.
A slums.
Slums are always fun, especially if there's a zombie outbreak in there.
Underground, aristocratic section, somewhere where the nobles live. But that way, it's kind of almost like a countryside. But instead of going to another village or another town, it's like, okay, we need to go to this inn in this part of town, or this warehouse. And you treat it basically the same. You'll have downtime in an inn or somewhere like that. That is like a home base, or some sort of home area that they primarily stay in, but then they venture out to these different parts of the city, almost the same way they'd venture out to a mountain or a cave or something to that effect in a more traditional setting. And you can also see if there is any segregation going on for like the different races. Like orcs live in the slums over here, but in these slums over here there are like a bunch of little halflings. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, it's kind of that. I mean, that's always important. That's the one thing, is that when the setting is primarily taking place in a large city like that, you've got to flesh out that city the same way you would a country. Like that city's got to have its own political internal structures. It's got to be like not just like, okay, there's like the mayor and then like a thieves guild. There's got to be like, okay, there's this merchant who hates this merchant. And these two gangs are having a war, and like this person's running for election against the current mayor or whatever. There's got to be multiple things going on. There can't just be the government.
Yes, conflict everywhere. I mean, especially if it's in a city, there's so much conflict going on at the same time, and that could be that's probably one of the struggles with building a campaign in a city, in an urban setting, because there's so much you can do in such little time. You just have to find a nice pace.
Yeah, and that's not to say that you like. That's the other thing, is unless there's straight up a reason, like the gates have been closed down and there's a quarantine on the city or something, you can still have the outlying areas be diverse and interesting enough that forays into it on occasion are still part of the game. Like, even if your game is about, taking care of a thieves guild in the city, I mean, that guild's still got to do things like supplies runs or, protection around the walls, because if there's monster problems, the thieves guild will suffer from that too, or whatever. There's still going to be reasons to get them out of that one setting to keep things from getting stale.
And also, along with an urban setting, I really like the Eberron campaign setting, because they add like a mechanical aspect to like their cities, and so there are spires, and it's not just run by people, but kind of like machines, and gears are turning.
Oh yeah, well, and that's really another. I mean, it goes in the classic decision of how high fantasy you want to go, because it's going to be entirely different depending on whether you're in a super high fantasy setting with majestical like spires that shouldn't physically exist and like mage guilds on every corner or something to that effect, versus a low fantasy setting where you're going to be dealing a lot more with more real life issues, such as disease and political structures that are archaic in nature and stuff like that. Essentially dealing with the grit of an actual dirty society versus, oh shit, someone created a golem that is now causing troubles in the merchant square.
Yeah. I would love to see a zombie outbreak in a large city.
Oh, well, I mean, that's like one, like, I don't know whether it's actually a classic or whether it's just a classic in my mind, because growing up, one of my first experiences to anything related to D&D was a game called Neverwinter Nights, which was essentially, it was I think at least licensed by Wizards of the Coast. It was an early BioWare game, I think after Baldur's Gate, along the same lines, but it was, in my mind, that's a classic, because I will always remember that you start out in Neverwinter as it's having a plague issue, And one of the first sections you go to is the Beggar's Nest, where there's a zombie outbreak. And to me, that's always been like a classic setting to use, especially for players who haven't played a bunch, is there is not only a plague or something, but there's been a zombie outbreak in the slums. Because unlike a zombie outbreak in like a village or something where it's like, oh god, this village is having issues, if that's happening in a city, you're not only dealing with the zombies, you're dealing with the guards trying to contain the zombies and the clergy trying to stop and find the source for zombies, and the politicians trying to handle the panic that's created in the rest of the city. Just being in that biome of a city makes a zombie outbreak all of a sudden logistically and story-wise a lot more interesting.
Definitely.
I think we answered that question pretty thoroughly.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question is from Earl Grey Tiefling, which I still find that name extremely amusing.
I love Earl Grey tea.
Yeah, it is. It is a damn good drink, as Sir Patrick. I almost said Sir Patrick Harris, but that's Neil Patrick Harris. Patrick Stewart would say.
Is he knighted?
Patrick Stewart? Yeah, he's. I think he's knighted. Let me Google that real quick. Patrick Stewart. Knighted.
Yeah, he must be.
Yep. He is knighted.
Perfect.
Yep.
Beautiful. As he should be.
As he should be. Acting. He is. God, that man is lovely. But from Earl Grey Tiefling, the question is, I started playing D&D online, but now I'm going to be running a game for friends in real life. Any tips on starting to use all the in real life supplies and essentials, grids, mini, DM screen, etc. that I've never had the need to use before? And that's from Earl Grey Tiefling.
Good question. Since I started playing 5e, I've been thinking of the same thing, figuring out what exactly I need for my players and for myself. First thing I picked up was a DM screen. Behind the DM screen, you can hide everything and set everything up the way you want it. You can have all your notes on the DM screen. Like you can have like little sticky notes, write down a few different rules that you tend to look back into the books. You can just have them written down and stick them on your DM screen.
That's one of those things where, like, especially when I first started playing, I didn't quite get the DM screen. I was like, I kind of felt like I had an instinct that, like, oh, if I use the DM screen, like, my players are gonna think I'm fudging rules all the time or something to that effect. But I didn't realize just how useful it is as a tool. Not just for, keeping things a secret, not for, just being able to put your notes out and not have anyone see them or worry about people, looking at your stuff. But it almost works more as even more of a separation. It kind of distinguishes you from the rest of the table. It kind of gives you your own space to work with that you can feel comfortable just doing your own thing with. The main thing I like about the DM screen, though, is that especially if you get one of the ones from like one of the ones that's pre-made as already set up, or one that you make, is you can have all that info that you don't want to have to keep in your head ready for you right in front of you. Mm-hmm. All the status effects that are hard to remember, like, oh, what does being poisoned actually do in 5e kind of thing. That's all right in front of you, so if it ever comes up, you can just look and be like, oh, that's what it was, rather than having to thumb through a book. Just having that ready to go reference is actually extremely valuable.
My favorite thing about the DM screen is when you're about to lay down an encounter, and so what you have to do is you grab your pieces and then you stand up because you can't reach over. So you stand up and everyone's already scared, freaking out. Yeah. And then you lay down your minis or whatever you use.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was also going to say, because they mentioned minis and stuff in the question, that minis and grids are fantastic, especially if you're running a larger party. I feel that's where grids and minis really shine, is when it's hard naturally to keep things together in your head. Like, if there's 7 characters or 8 characters in addition to like 2 or 3 monsters, that's a lot to keep in your head in terms of positioning and everything, and having a grid of minis really sets it up. However, I feel like a lot of folks, especially new DMs, are a little bit freaked out because they're like, okay, I need to, because let's be honest, minis aren't inexpensive if you're getting actual minis.
Definitely.
If you're, it's kind of intimidating. You have to get the grid and the minis and everything, and that can be a big investment up front.
So what I like to do is I like to have a miniature for each player, and I like to use my extra dice as like for the creatures.
Yeah,
because they're universal. Like you can use them. They're color coded, so you can, like, these colors are these creatures, and so on. And also with the grid, I don't really use a grid, but I like to like draw out what their terrain kind of looks like, what their environment looks like, and so I show that to them. But we position their characters, and we position their minis around with the dice, so everyone knows where they're at. And we still use like even though that there aren't squares that determine space, we still kind of use like a relative space in terms of speed and movement.
Okay, so it's more about representation of the battlefield than actual, like, okay, this is exactly 30 feet kind of thing. It's more about, for when you set up, it's more about saying, okay, you're here in relation to this.
Yes.
Yeah. I've done it both ways. I've done both theater of the mind and purely, and grids and minis strictly. I find nowadays that I do a mix. I do theater of the mind for smaller battles, encounters that don't really need the setup, but for like boss battles or more complicated encounters, I always set up a grid and minis. But one thing I can recommend that I've had a lot of success with is paper minis. Specifically because I didn't want to spend God knows how much setting up a starting set of, like, okay, 5 or 6 player character minis, and then who knows how many goddamn monster minis. But then I found a PDF that I just literally put images into. So, like, you know, the standard picture of a pit fiend or what have you, or you know, various bandits or whatever, and you just fold them up into essentially triangles that stand on their own. It has an image of the character on both sides. They're, you know, facing the players. And it costs almost nothing. Like, it costs the amount that it costs to print paper, like colored paper, and the time to assemble them with, like, scissors and tape or glue. And that way you can have a visual representation not only of your players with any image that they choose to represent their players or their characters. You can also have actual to-scale representations of monsters with an actual image, so it's not fully having to imagine it, but not having to drop, you know, $20 on a, you know, ancient dragon mini.
It gets very spendy.
It does. It's right up there with, like, Warhammer or something to that effect, if you actually go full on minis. I might, now that I'm no longer a poor college student, I probably will start investing in actual in real life minis, at least for my characters and for my player characters. Especially with, like, Hero Forge being an awesome option. If you haven't checked that out, do it, because it's a fantastic online one where you can literally make your mini from scratch. It's really powerful and really nice, and surprisingly affordable if you're just making 1 or 2 rather than, like, a horde. But yeah, in general, I would also say just don't be afraid to go without the mini and grid. Like, for the vast majority of stuff, you can very easily get by with purely theater of the mind. But yeah, that, and always have extra pencils. Someone will forget their pencil.
Always extra pencils. I always forget mine, even as a DM, so I need to be better on that.
Yeah, I went to Rite Aid because I started the new in real life campaign recently, and right before I was like, screw it, and I just got like I think 50 pack of basic pencils and like a pencil sharpener. I'm like, I am never running out again, ever.
And extra paper. Usually players don't bring extra paper, so I generally just have a notebook that I can rip pages out of if I want to, but
Yeah, and that's another thing is that, like, I think I've mentioned it a couple times, but always take notes, especially as a DM, but even as a player, always take notes or have a designated note taker. For other supplies and essentials, snacks, beverages, obviously. The main difference you're gonna find that is that in real life versus online, role plays a lot. Honestly, as much as I love playing online, roleplay is a lot more satisfying in person. Recognizing facial expressions and hand movements and everything just adds so much more to character interaction and NPC portrayal than just talking online.
I agree.
It's kind of interesting to think about because for a lot of us that was kind of the reverse. Like we started playing in real life and then online became an option and we jumped to that because Lord knows it's 10 times easier to find folks to play with and who actually have a consistent day off that they can, actually play. But it's interesting to think about going from only ever playing online to playing in person because I feel like that's going to be a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
So, one more question. Over time, and this is from Jen out of Jen, over time, have you found yourself developing a sort of personal style of DMing, or do you switch up your style from game to game?
I think you definitely develop your own personal style of DMing, but the key is to not keep it the same. And so switching up your style, it can be focusing on for the next couple game sessions, we're going to be focusing on like sneaking around, doing something like that. And then a few games later, then you're working on more large battle scenarios. And then a couple games later, you're working on your diplomatic skills, constantly switching it up.
Yeah, and I feel like it's one of those things where a lot of it's determined by your relationship to the party. Because especially I find myself DMing differently for different groups, especially like depending on a lot of it depends on how seriously they take the campaign. Like, is it just a fun one shot or a fun campaign where everyone's doing wacky stuff all the time, where just mischief is a thing, or is it more story driven? That'll completely determine how I'm DMing in the given session. But I will say I definitely have a specialty. I would say that I feel like most DMs end up having a type of game they like running the most. For me, it's more of a story-driven, kind of classic RPG style setup with, adventuring party, political intrigue, that kind of stuff. But it's kind of one of those things where you can only get better by playing different kinds of games and learning how to DM a different style of campaign. Because once you change up your style, I mean, it might just be slightly different, but it'll still be valuable to get that experience.
Exactly. Like, I have my own personal thing. I like mine just being crazy. I love crazy NPCs, and I just love big explosions. My DMing is like a Michael Bay film.
I was just gonna say, as DM'd by Michael Bay.
Yeah.
That is very true. I can vouch as one of your players that's one thing is I always loved our games because it was very much a escape and like very much a let's just get a little bit intoxicated and go wild with these characters. It was always fun.
Exactly. Thank you, Joe. I'm glad you had fun.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, you were a main reason why I got back into D&D, even before 5e came back out. Or even before 5e came out. I had played a decent amount in middle school and high school, and played a little bit, but hadn't. And then all of a sudden, after we started playing, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a thing I love, and started up again. So, and here we are on a D&D podcast 5 years later.
Beautiful.
Indeed. And I think that's where we'll leave it for today. For those of you at home, as always, we would love it if you send us your questions and submissions to @DearDMPodcast on Twitter, or to our email at deardm.submit@gmail.com. The more questions you send our way, the more content we can make for you lovely folks, and the happier I'll be. Also, one other thing as well. For those of you who like Critical Role, which I imagine is a good amount of you, I will be appearing in a fan project that is coming out on February 23rd. It's by Cantata Pansophical. It's a fantastic group that I'm lucky to be a part of, and it's a rewrite of the Hamilton musical, but rewritten about Critical Role, and it is fantastic. Check it out on Twitter. I am playing Percival Frederickstein von Musil-Kowalski de Rolo III, and it is a good amount of fun. We're putting out teasers every Tuesday and Thursday. Definitely check it out. And as always, I definitely want to thank Paul Parisa for use of his song Whether or Not as our opening and closing music. Paul is a dear friend of mine, and Ethan's, actually. He's a fantastic musician. Please go check him out on SoundCloud and everything. He is absolutely fantastic.
The best and beautiful. Amazing man.
Indeed. We love Paul. Paul is a great person. But I think that will do it here for us on Dear DM. Thank you very much for joining me, Ethan. It's been lovely talking with you.
Lovely talking to you too, Joe.
And as always, I don't actually have a catchphrase to leave the show with, so for now, goodbye. You should say goodbye too.
Fare thee well. Hold on, one more time.
Nope, I'm keeping that in. That's in the podcast.